My parents were real proud of me back then. They thought I was teaching my sisters how to serve like good little housemaids, just the way our family believed girls were supposed to be raised. But what they didn't realize was, I was actually showing my sisters how to take back control. See, in our family, the rule was simple: if you were born a girl, you were meant to serve the men. That was it. Didn't matter how old you were. Whether you were just starting to walk or already a grandmother, the moment you could carry a plate or pour a glass of water, the men decided your life now belonged to them. Growing up, I was treated like I was in charge of my sisters, and even my stepmom. That's how deep it ran. So to me, it didn't seem weird. It was just normal, until I turned 12. I'll never forget it. I was lying on the couch while my stepmom fed me grapes like I was some kind of king, when all of a sudden, I heard this loud thud from another room. Then came screaming. Another thump. And then silence. I turned to look, and what I saw is burned into my brain. My dad and a few of my uncles were beating the crap out of my little sister, who was just 8 years old at the time. Her only mistake? She spilled the glass of water she was bringing my dad. My stepmom ran in, but not to stop them. She didn't even look at my sister. Instead, she dropped to the floor, cleaned up the spill, and apologized to the men like she was the one who did something wrong. That was it for me. That was the moment I realized I didn't want any part of this. Next morning, I went to my dad and told him I wanted to start training my sisters by myself. Said I needed to practice giving orders without grown-ups watching over me. He lit up like a Christmas tree. Hugged me hard and told me I was a born leader. After breakfast, I took my sisters into my bedroom. They stood by the wall like they were about to be punished. Aaliyah, the 10-year-old, even reached for her skirt like she thought I was about to demand something horrible. I stopped her right away, then patted the edge of my bed and told both of them to sit down. Their faces changed in a split second. Then I pushed my lunch tray toward them and said, "Eat." They looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Their eyes got wide. Then they nearly fell to their knees thanking me like I'd given them the world. As they devoured the food, I told them the truth. I wanted to help them. They stared at me like I was speaking another language, then suddenly clung to me, hugging me like they were holding on for dear life. We spent the whole afternoon coming up with a plan to get them out of that house. And we didn't wait. That very same day, we kicked things off. Out in the open, they kept playing the part, serving me like they were supposed to, acting like I was in charge. But behind closed doors, we were plotting their escape. It worked better than I imagined, at least at the start. My parents couldn't stop bragging about me. At family dinners, my dad would boast about how his daughters jumped the second I moved a finger. My stepmom would tell her friends how gifted I was at commanding respect. They had no idea what was really going on. But man, it tore me up inside. I had to sit there while my sisters got up at 4 in the morning to make breakfast for me. I had to nod like I was proud while my uncles barked orders for foot rubs and other nonsense. I even had to strike them in front of everyone sometimes, just to keep up appearances. Later, I'd sneak in, apologize, and clean up their cuts and bruises in secret. It killed me every time. One day, I went up to the attic to grab some old photo albums they wanted to see. While I was digging through boxes, I found this loose wooden panel. Behind it were papers, documents I'd never seen before. One of them was a medical degree. The name on it stopped me cold. It was my real mom's name. I just stood there stunned. My whole life, I'd been told she was uneducated, went crazy, and died right after my youngest sister was born. That's what my dad always said. But now I knew the truth. And it lit a fire under me. After that, I started sneaking off to internet cafes after school. Told my folks I was going to religious studies so they wouldn't question it. I looked up everything I could, hotlines, stories of girls escaping families like ours, what safe homes looked like. I printed out numbers, gave my sisters money, and showed them how to hide it where only they cleaned. I drilled them on the basics, what to say, who to call, what laws made what our family did illegal. It felt like we were getting close. Really close. Then, everything blew up. My dad didn't find much. But he found one little piece of paper. Lila, the youngest, had written her name on it. That's it. Just her name. He lost his mind. Started pacing around, red in the face. Then he said out loud that both girls were getting married off immediately, to save them from being corrupted. I wanted to say something. I wanted to yell. But I kept quiet. I had to protect the plan. So instead I pivoted. 3 days before the weddings, Lila told her teacher exactly what I taught her. Every word, just like we practiced. And thank God we lived in the US, because the school called CPS right away. Lila was taken from the school before my parents even found out. But then things took a turn. Lila, poor kid, was so anxious she gave the school the wrong home address. And because my dad had listed a fake one, just in case something like this ever happened, CPS never came to our actual house. Once my dad heard what went down at the school, he leaned on his connections and started tearing the house apart. That's when he found everything. My hidden folder. All of it. Photos of bruises. Notes I used to teach them reading and writing. The entire plan. He burned it all right there. But since I was a boy, he didn't punish me like he would have punished the girls. Nope. He had something else in mind. That night, he shook me awake and told me I had a choice. Aaliyah's wedding was the next morning. I could either officiate the ceremony and hand her off to his 45-year-old buddy, or he'd send her somewhere so awful, this place would seem like a dream. Morning came too fast. By 5 a.m., they were already dressing her in red and gold. Her future husband was sitting in the living room like he was shopping for furniture. I stood there watching them wrap heavy gold bangles around her tiny wrists. My hands were shaking as I held the ceremonial book my dad had forced into them. The groom sat back on our couch, popping grapes in his mouth while eyeing Aaliyah like she was on sale. My dad stood behind me, one hand clamped tight on my shoulder, just enough pressure to remind me what was at stake. I opened the book to the marked page. But the words all blurred through the tears in my eyes. Aaliyah stood perfectly still while my stepmom adjusted her veil like this was some happy event. But I saw it. I saw her hands shaking. Then my uncles came in, one by one, and stood against the walls. My youngest uncle even took out his phone and started recording like this was something to be proud of. That wedding footage, my dad wanted to use it later, show it off at men's gatherings like some kind of family trophy. Proof of how devoted we were to tradition. I cleared my throat and started reading the opening prayers. That's when I noticed something off. The groom kept glancing at his watch, shifting around like his seat was too hot. He looked uneasy. Maybe nervous. That's when a wild idea hit me. While I kept reading, I started slipping up, intentionally. Mispronounced sacred words, flubbed lines, butchered the ceremony like a rookie. The kind of mistakes that'd make any educated man squirm. Sure enough, the groom's eyebrows started twitching. My dad's grip on my shoulder tightened, but he couldn't call me out without admitting his own son didn't know how to officiate a simple religious ceremony. That groom was getting visibly uncomfortable. I took it up a notch. Stopped mid-sentence and turned to Aaliyah. "Show your future husband your hands," I said in Arabic. She raised her small hands slowly. I examined them like I was studying an artifact. "They're shaking," I announced loud enough for the whole room to hear. "She might be sick." The groom jumped up like I'd slapped him. He was 45, already had 2 wives buried, and the last thing he wanted was a frail third one. He walked right over and grabbed Aaliyah's wrist, feeling for a pulse like he was checking livestock. She played her part perfectly, legs wobbling, lips pale. The groom turned to my father. "The girl looks sick," he muttered. "Is she okay?" My dad immediately tried to smooth things over, saying she was just nervous, but I jumped in. "She hasn't eaten since yesterday," said her stomach hurt. That part wasn't a lie. None of us had been eating much. The stress made it impossible to keep anything down. The groom dropped her wrist like it burned him. "I need a healthy wife. Not another burden." My dad tried to object, but the man was already collecting his stuff. "Get her checked out by a doctor," he said. "I'll come back when you've got medical proof she's fit for marriage. I'm not paying full price for damaged goods." Then he left. My father exploded. He snatched the ceremonial book from my hands and hurled it against the wall. My uncle suddenly remembered other places to be and slipped out fast, not wanting to be there for what came next. But my dad didn't hit me. No, he went after Aaliyah. He grabbed her by the hair and dragged her into the kitchen. "Learn to fake being sick?" he shouted. "Let me show you what real sickness feels like." He filled a bucket with ice water and shoved her head in. I counted in my head 1, 2, 3, before he yanked her up, gasping and dripping. My stepmom just stood in the corner, wringing her hands, eyes wide, but silent. "Stop!" I shouted, surprising even myself. "You'll leave marks. The groom will think she's been beaten." That got through. My dad paused, thinking it over. Bruises would ruin her bride price. He let go, and Aaliyah collapsed to the floor, coughing up water. Then he turned to me, eyes sharp and calculating. "You're right," he said slowly. "She needs to look presentable. You're in charge of that now." He pointed a finger. "She'll stay in your room. You'll monitor her health. 1 week. If she's not marriage ready by then, you'll both regret it." I helped Aaliyah to her feet, wrapped my arm around her trembling shoulders, and led her to my room. As we walked past the kitchen doorway, I caught my stepmother staring. It wasn't sympathy exactly, but there was something in her eyes. A flicker of something I hadn't seen before. maybe understanding. That night, I gave Aaliyah my bed and took the floor. She was still freezing from the ice bath, so I piled every blanket I had on her. Around midnight, she finally whispered, "The plan didn't work. He's just delaying it." I sat up. "We bought time," I told her. "That's all we need. A week isn't enough," she said. "It has to be." The next morning, I woke up to my father looming over me. "Get up," he barked. "New rules. Your stepmother checks on both of you every hour. She doesn't leave this room except for bathroom breaks. Make sure she eats. Make her look marriageable." After he stomped off, my stepmother walked in with a tray of food. She set it down gently, then looked at me with something strange in her expression. "Your mother was smart too," she said quietly. "Didn't save her." Then she left without another word. The first 3 days were a blur of force-feeding and hourly visits. I made sure Aaliyah ate everything. My father would be checking her weight. In the tiny slivers of privacy between check-ins, I taught her emergency phrases, shelter addresses, important English words, phone numbers. On day 4, something shifted. My stepmother came in for her noon check, but this time, she shut the door behind her. From her pocket, she pulled out a small flip phone and held it out to me. "It's prepaid," she said. "Hide it under the loose board under the kitchen sink when you're done." I stared at her, stunned. "I couldn't save my own daughters," she said, eyes locked on Aaliyah. "They're gone, married off. But maybe—" She didn't finish. That night I used the phone. Recorded Aaliyah explaining everything, the beatings, the servitude. Took pictures of old scars on her arms and back. Then, while my father was snoring in his study, I snuck in and snapped photos of whatever documents I could find. Some looked like forged birth records. He was trying to make Aaliyah seem older than she was. On the 5th day, my father told us he'd found a doctor. A friendly one. The kind who said whatever he was paid to say. The appointment was set for day 6. That night, I made up my mind. I called the number I'd memorized from weeks ago, a domestic violence hotline. Whispered everything into the phone as fast as I could. The woman on the other end told me to call 911. I said I couldn't. My father had local police in his pocket. She understood and gave me a different number, one for a special unit that handled forced marriage cases. Day 6 arrived faster than I wanted. My father dressed Aaliyah himself that morning, making sure she looked healthy and well-fed. The doctor didn't even take her to a clinic, he showed up right at our house. I watched from the doorway as this man examined my sister in the living room. He didn't even flinch, checked her teeth, looked at her skin, made her walk back and forth like she was some prize animal. Then he smiled, declared her fit for marriage, and took a wad of cash from my father. The wedding was rescheduled for the next day. That night, I knew there was no more time. It was now or never. I sat down next to Aaliyah and told her, "Whatever happens tomorrow, trust me. No matter what." What I did next made my stomach churn. I went to my father and told him I wanted to make Aaliyah's ceremony special. I suggested holding it at the community center instead of our house, more space, more people to witness our family's honor. His ego snapped it right up. He didn't even think twice. The idea of an audience inflated his pride so fast, he spent the entire night on the phone, inviting everyone he could think of. The more people there, the bigger the show. A perfect tribute to his so-called parenting. What he didn't know was that I'd already tipped off the forced marriage unit. They were going to be there. The morning of the wedding, I helped Aaliyah get ready. Same dress, same veil. But this time, I whispered reassurance into her ear the entire time I adjusted her clothes. "Just hang on. We're almost there." My stepmother stood silently in the corner. When we were almost out the door, she walked over and pressed something into my palm. "Car keys. The gray sedan 2 blocks down," she whispered. "It's registered under my sister's name. She doesn't know I borrowed it." My pulse spiked. We had a getaway vehicle. When we arrived at the community center, the place was already buzzing with guests. My father strutted around, chest puffed like a peacock, shaking hands and nodding at all the praise. He soaked in the attention like he'd won a championship. The groom was there too. Dressed in a sharp suit, holding a thick envelope, the bride price. His smirk made my skin crawl. I took my place at the front, ceremonial book in hand. Aaliyah stood just to my left, her eyes fixed on the floor. When the room settled, I began reading the opening prayers. But this time, I didn't stumble. My voice was steady and strong, each word sharp with purpose. I needed every eye and ear focused on the ceremony. We were on the edge of something big, I could feel it. Right as I reached the part that asked for the bride's consent, the doors slammed open. Only, it wasn't the authorities. It was my uncle. The oldest one. The one who had moved away years ago. He walked in wearing traditional robes, smiling wide like he'd just arrived at a celebration. My dad froze, his face flickered between panic and surprise, but quickly masked it with a grin. He rushed over and hugged his brother like nothing was out of place. Continue. My uncle boomed. I wouldn't miss my niece's big day. I clenched my jaw and turned back to the crowd. My hands were trembling, but I kept reading. We were losing control of the plan, and fast. Aaliyah looked up at me, confused and scared. I could see it in her eyes, she knew something had gone wrong. I powered through the prayers, trying to stall. Trying to think. But then I noticed something. A tiny red stain, right where the white fabric hugged her ribs. Blood. She must have scratched herself, maybe without realizing. Maybe on purpose. I didn't care. I seized it. Wait. I shouted, pointing. She's bleeding. The room buzzed with whispers. The groom's face tightened as he stepped forward, eyes narrowing on the spreading stain. What is this? He barked, turning to my father. Is she injured? My dad yanked Aaliyah's arm, ready to yank her aside, but I stepped in. Let me check, I said firmly. I've been monitoring her health all week. I knelt beside her and lifted the edge of her dress just enough to expose the scratches. Some were old. Others were fresh, angry red lines crossing her skin. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The groom stepped back like she was contagious. You tried to sell me a damaged girl. He snapped at my father. She's not just sick, she's unstable. My father's face turned purple, but he couldn't lash out in front of all those people. Not when his entire reputation was hanging by a thread. The groom stormed out, still holding the envelope. Guests started murmuring, some drifting toward the exit. We drove home in silence so thick it felt like the air itself had weight. My father's grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled. My stepmother sat stiff as a board beside him. I held Aaliyah in the back seat as she trembled against me. The second we got inside the house, my father lost it. He shoved Aaliyah hard into the wall and raised his hand to strike, but before it landed, my uncle stepped in and grabbed his wrist. Not the face, he said flatly. She's still sellable. But clearly your methods aren't working. Then he turned and looked at me. The boy's too soft. He added. Let me handle their training. My father didn't argue. Just nodded. You've failed me. He told me coldly. You both have. And now you'll learn what real discipline means. That night my uncle moved in. Unlike my father's explosive rages, my uncle's cruelty was cold and calculated. He brought with him a notebook and a system. Every mistake, every pause, every glance, every misstep, earned a mark. 10 marks meant punishment. The first punishment came 3 days later. Aaliyah had racked up 10 marks for the dumbest things, walking too slowly, not lowering her eyes fast enough, forgetting to ask permission to use the bathroom. My uncle made me watch. He forced her to kneel on dry rice for an hour. Her knees bled through her dress, but she wasn't allowed to cry. She didn't even flinch. You need to understand something. My uncle told me afterward. Women are like animals. They only learn through pain. That night, I snuck into Aaliyah's room with antiseptic and bandages. I cleaned her wounds as gently as I could. She grabbed my wrist. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. I'd rather die. Don't say that. I whispered back. Please. Just hold on. We'll find another way. But my uncle was making that almost impossible. He installed locks on the windows, took the hidden phone my stepmother had given me, and tore apart my room every day searching for anything suspicious. He even started sleeping in the hallway outside our bedrooms. No more midnight escapes. No more secret plans. 2 weeks passed like that. The notebook filled with marks. Aaliyah got thinner, weaker. Even with the forced meals, she looked like a ghost. My uncle would randomly drag her out of bed at night for obedience drills, just to keep her on edge. And then, something changed. During one of my uncle's sessions, right as he raised his hand, my stepmother suddenly clutched her chest and collapsed. My uncle froze mid-strike. My dad panicked and rushed to her side. My heart! She gasped, breath ragged. The stress. They called a real doctor this time. Private. Expensive. He examined her, then gave strict orders. No stress, no noise, no disturbances. She needed rest. Just like that, the garage became the new torture room, giving us tiny pockets of peace while she was recovering. One afternoon, while my uncle was out in the garage, my stepmother pulled me aside. Her fingers dug into my wrist. I faked it. She whispered quickly. Listen. There's a woman, Mrs. Harper. She teaches at your school. She's been asking about you. Mrs. Harper. My English teacher. I hadn't seen her in weeks. My father told the school I was sick. She knows something's wrong, my stepmother said. She's asking questions. If you can get to her. But how? I asked, my voice barely audible. I'm never alone. He follows me everywhere. Even to the bathroom. She didn't answer. She just gave me a look. Like she was daring me to find a way. The only time I was allowed outside the house was for mosque, and even then, my uncle sat right beside me like a guard dog. But then something came to mind. Next month was the religious festival. It was the one day when the entire community gathered at the Grand Mosque. Big crowds, loud prayers, total chaos. I realized that might be the only moment we'd ever get lost in a crowd. So I started laying the groundwork early. I became the perfect son. I stopped resisting. I acted like I finally embraced my uncle's teachings. I nodded along with his rants. I even chimed in during Aliyah's punishments, offering crueler ideas, pushing for more discipline. It made me sick inside. But it worked. They started trusting me again. My father even began praising me in front of others, said I was finally growing into a real man. My uncle took it further. He started training me, showing me how to maintain control, how to track behavior. He even shared his precious notebook system and explained how to log infractions efficiently, as if it were some kind of family legacy. One evening during a discipline session, he got too carried away. He struck Aliyah across the back, hard. Too hard. She crumpled to the ground. Unmoving. Blood soaked through her dress. My father panicked. If she dies, he hissed, we'll have the authorities crawling all over us. They carried her to my room and barked at me to treat her wounds. As I cleaned the deep, raw gash across her back, something clicked in my head. This wasn't just cruelty, it was evidence. Evidence even they couldn't spin. I reached up into the air vent where I'd hidden an old digital camera months ago. I carefully took photos, every inch of that wound. Her breathing was shallow, and a fever crept in overnight. For 3 days, she slipped in and out of consciousness. My father got nervous enough to call the same doctor who'd treated my stepmother. The moment the doctor saw Aliyah's back, his face went pale. She needs a hospital, he said quietly. No hospitals, my father growled, stuffing money into his coat pocket. You treat her here. The doctor agreed, reluctantly. He brought antibiotics and gave me strict instructions on how to care for her. And just like that, my uncle was banned from touching her until she recovered. For the first time in weeks, we had silence. I became her nurse, her protector. I sat by her bedside and whispered escape plans between sponge baths and painkillers. She wasn't always coherent, but I kept talking anyway. On the 4th night, she finally focused. Lila, she whispered. Have you heard anything? I shook my head. We still didn't know what had happened to our youngest sister. She'd been taken by the authorities, and that was the last we'd heard. I dream about her, Aliyah said, blinking slowly. She's in a house with windows that open. She eats at a table with other kids. She goes to school. That's not a dream, I told her. That's her future. I tried to sound confident. I tried to believe it myself. But I didn't know if we'd survive long enough to see that future. My uncle's patience started to thin. He made comments about Aliyah being too much trouble. He told my father he should cut his losses. I knew what that meant. I'd heard the rumors. Girls sent away to relatives overseas, who were never seen again. Some whispered about suitcases packed with cement, about empty passports, about bodies never found. The festival was 2 weeks away. I kept up the act. While I pretended to be their little apprentice, I was secretly collecting everything I could. Photos of the notebook. Video clips of conversations. Screenshots of financial documents my stepmother hinted at. One night, I broke into my father's office. His computer password? His birthday. I wasn't surprised. Inside, I found forged birth certificates, fake medical reports, and email chains with other families. Marriage arrangements. Cash deals. Like he was running a private auction. Then I saw it, emails about Lila. My father had hired lawyers. He was trying to file for custody, claiming the authorities had kidnapped her. The man he was emailing was helping him spin the story, painting himself as the poor, grieving father just trying to get his baby girl back. My hands were shaking as I copied everything onto a flash drive. If he got Lila back, her fate was sealed. The next morning, everything shifted again. The groom from Aliyah's failed wedding showed up. But this time, he wasn't there for her. He wanted his money back. They argued in the living room. I crouched in the hallway, listening. You owe me, the groom snapped. You humiliated me. Wasted my time. She'll be ready soon, my father said. Just give me a month. I don't want damaged goods. the groom hissed. But I'll take the other one, when she's old enough. They were talking about Lila. Planning her future sale before they even had her back. That night I made my move. I waited until the house was silent. Then I crept into my stepmother's room and took her phone while she slept. I'd memorized Mrs. Harper's number months ago from the school directory. My hands were cold and clammy as I dialed. She picked up on the third ring. Her voice was groggy. "Hello? Mrs. Harper," I whispered. "It's me, from your English class. I need help." "Oh my God!" she breathed. "We've been looking for you. Are you safe?" "No," I said. "None of us are. Please. I don't have much time." I rattled off our address. Told her everything I could in one breath, my voice barely louder than air. She promised she'd act immediately. As I hung up, I heard footsteps. I shoved the phone back under the pillow and darted back to my room. My heart pounded in my ears all night. But the next day, nothing. Normal breakfast. Normal routine. No police. No flashing lights. Just more silence. Had Mrs. Harper failed? Or had my father's connections caught wind? That evening, my uncle gathered us and announced a new plan. He'd found a reform house, a place that trained disobedient girls. Aaliyah would go there to learn her place, before they tried to marry her off again. I knew what those places were. I'd heard whispers. Places where girls vanished. Where obedience was beaten into them or buried with them. "She leaves tomorrow night," my uncle said, grinning. "After midnight. No neighbors. No questions." I had less than 30 hours. That night I risked it all. I told Aaliyah everything. About Mrs. Harper. About the camera. The emails. The reform house. Her face went pale. "They're sending me away?" "Tomorrow night," I said. "Whatever happens, be ready to run." The next day moved like syrup. I kept up the act, even as my mind screamed. My uncle packed Aaliyah's things like it was a vacation. My father counted out payment for the reform house like he was tipping a waiter. My stepmother floated through the house like a ghost, silent, drained. But then I noticed something strange. Cars. One after another, creeping down our street. Slowing down as they passed our house. Something was coming. And it was coming fast. That same sedan circled the block 3 times. My uncle noticed too, frowning as he peeked through the curtains. "Probably nothing," my father muttered, but even he looked uneasy. Dinner was quiet and tense. Aaliyah barely touched her food, her hands trembling so bad she could hardly hold her spoon. I forced myself to criticize her manners, throwing in a sharp remark about how she was embarrassing us. My uncle gave me an approving nod. Inside, I was choking on guilt. Every minute felt like an hour. At exactly 11 p.m., my uncle told Aaliyah to go get ready. She stood up silently and walked off to change clothes. I followed, pretending to supervise her, like always. In her room, I pressed the car keys into her hand, the ones my stepmother had slipped me weeks ago. "Gray sedan. 2 blocks north," I whispered. "If the chance comes." She nodded once and tucked the keys into her sleeve. We came back to the living room where my uncle waited, holding a rope. "For the journey," he said, like that made it less twisted. As he stepped toward her to tie her hands, the doorbell rang. We all froze. Who the hell rings a doorbell at 11 p.m.? My father moved slowly toward the door, peeking through the peephole. His face went pale. "Police," he hissed. My uncle didn't wait. He grabbed Aaliyah's arm and dragged her toward the back exit. I had seconds, just seconds, to make my choice. Keep playing the obedient son, or blow the whole thing up. The doorbell rang again, louder this time. I lunged forward, grabbed my uncle's precious notebook from the table, and bolted to the front door, flinging it open before my father could stop me. 2 officers stood there, with Mrs. Harper right behind them. "They're taking her out the back," I yelled. Everything exploded after that. The officers shoved past my father, who tried to block them. I heard my uncle cursing from the kitchen, followed by Aaliyah's scream. My stepmother stood frozen in the hallway, her hand clamped over her mouth. One officer radioed for backup to cover the back exit. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. More squad cars rolled in. Neighbors spilled out onto their porches, whispering and pointing. Then my uncle burst back into the living room, dragging Aaliyah with him. He spotted the officers and let go of her like she was made of fire. His face twisted, rage, fear, calculation, all at once. My father started shouting about rights, and religious freedom, and illegal searches. One of the officers held up a court order. "Based on evidence of child abuse and attempted trafficking," he said calmly. Mrs. Harper stepped forward, locking eyes with me. "Your teacher showed us everything. she said softly. The photos. The recordings. You were very brave. My uncle snapped. He charged at me, fists clenched. But he didn't make it far. An officer tackled him and had him cuffed in seconds. My father backed up against the wall, stunned. My own son, he said, voice shaking. You destroyed us. No. I saved us. They led my uncle and father out in cuffs. My stepmother finally moved, crossing the room to pull Aaliyah and me into a hug. For the first time ever, I saw her cry. Your mother would be proud, she whispered. Social workers started pouring in, moving quickly but gently. One wrapped Aaliyah in a soft blanket. Another one approached me with a calm, serious voice. You'll need to come with us, she said. All of you. There's a safe place waiting. As we stepped outside the house that had felt like a prison for so long, something hit me. The flash drive. I ran back upstairs and grabbed it from its hiding spot. The last piece of evidence. We were going to need it. There'd be investigations. Testimonies. Trials. A long, messy road ahead. But for that night, just that night, we were free. In the back of the van, Aaliyah clutched my hand like a lifeline. Through the window, I watched our old house shrink behind us. Police tape across the door. Neighbors whispering, staring. It was finally over. Then Aaliyah asked, What about Lila? The social worker up front turned and smiled softly. She's safe. Has been all along. You'll see her tomorrow. Tomorrow. That word felt unreal. We'd spent so long thinking only about making it to the next hour. The idea of a tomorrow? It felt like magic. Mrs. Harper followed behind us in her own car, eyes on us at every red light. She'd fought like hell to make this happen, pressured every agency, bypassed every obstacle. If not for her, none of this would have worked. The safe house wasn't what I expected. No bars. No locks. No screaming behind doors. Just a simple home. Warm lights. The smell of fresh bread. A woman named Rachel met us at the door. You're safe here, she said gently. All of you. They gave us our own rooms, but left the doors open so we could still see each other. Aaliyah fell asleep almost immediately, like her body had finally stopped bracing for impact. I couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at a ceiling that didn't drip or crack or hide mold in the corners. Just silence. Soft, peaceful silence. My stepmother sat by my bed for a while, quiet. Then she reached into her pocket and handed me a photograph, creased and old. My mother. Young and smiling in a graduation cap. She tried to run. My stepmother whispered. Tried to take you all. Your father caught her at the bus station the night before she died. He said it was her heart, but... She didn't finish. She didn't have to. When sunlight crept through curtains I was allowed to open, I thought about the trial, the testimonies, the recovery. I thought about Lila. And for the first time in my life, the word future didn't feel like a lie. The middle of our story had ended. The hardest chapter was about to begin. But for once, we were walking into it with a fighting chance. I woke up to sunlight, not shouting. My stepmother was gone, but the photo lay on the nightstand. I tucked it in my pocket and went to check on Aaliyah. She sat at the edge of her bed, looking at her hands. The bruises were dark now, deep purple where the rope had bitten into her skin. I sat beside her. She leaned into me, quiet but solid. Rachel knocked gently and brought us breakfast on real plates, not the cold metal ones from home. Social worker will be here soon, she said kindly. Just to talk about next steps. My stomach knotted up again. More questions. More strangers. More digging into wounds. When it was my turn, I sat across from a calm woman with a gentle voice. She said she specialized in cases like ours. I handed her the flash drive. I think this has everything, I told her. She nodded, eyes kind. Then we'll make sure it's used the right way. Her face grew more serious with every file she opened. This is a lot, she murmured. You really documented everything. I just nodded while she scrolled through the evidence. Photos of Maya's bruises, the forged documents, the tangled financial records. She stopped when she reached the email thread about Lila. We need to act on this immediately, she said, already pulling out her phone. That same afternoon, Mrs. Harper showed up carrying bags of clothes and school supplies she'd gathered from other teachers. She hugged me tight, and to my own surprise, I didn't pull away. She'd even brought my school backpack, still packed with assignments from weeks ago. The principal said you're welcome back anytime, she told me gently. No pressure at all. The thought of sitting in a math class felt unreal. How was I supposed to care about algebra after everything we'd lived through? The next couple of days passed in a whirlwind: interviews, doctor visits, talks with lawyers. The prosecutor assigned to our case didn't sugarcoat anything. She was sharp, firm, and clear. The trial was going to be grueling. My father had already hired high-powered attorneys who were spinning stories about cultural clashes and innocent misunderstandings. On the third day, they brought Lila. She looked different. Healthier. She was wearing jeans and a pink sweater instead of the restrictive, long dresses our father used to demand. As soon as she saw us, she broke away from her foster mom and flew into Maya's arms. They clung to each other, both sobbing. I just stood there awkwardly until Lila yanked me into the hug. "They have a dog," she whispered, beaming through tears. "And I go to real school now. And no one hits me when I spill juice." Her foster mother, Alexandra, stood nearby with a warm smile. She'd been caring for Lila ever since the school first intervened, slowly helping her settle into something close to a normal childhood. She even showed us pictures on her phone, Lila at the park, eating ice cream, curled up with books in bed. That reunion was both beautiful and heartbreaking. We were together again, but not really. Lila had to go back with Alexandra that night. The court would decide where we'd all end up once the trial was over. My stepmother shocked everyone when she fully cooperated with the prosecutors. She handed over bank records, signed affidavits, and told them everything, years of abuse she'd endured and witnessed. Her own daughters, my stepsisters, were located in other states, stuck in arranged marriages orchestrated by my father years earlier. Their cases were added to the list of charges. The trial was scheduled for 6 weeks out. My father and uncle stayed behind bars, no bail. Too risky, the judge said. Their lawyer tried pushing the angle of religious persecution, but the judge didn't buy into that as a defense for child abuse. Those 6 weeks at the safe house became a strange kind of normal. Maya started therapy, even though she barely spoke during sessions. I returned to school part-time. I'd sit in class, staring at the board, but my mind kept drifting. Mrs. Harper checked in every day. She never pushed, just made sure I knew she was there. Oddly enough, the hardest part was figuring out how to make my own choices. Even small ones, what to eat, when to go to sleep, felt overwhelming. I'd spent my whole life being told what to do. Rachel was patient. She gently guided us through it, helping us relearn freedom. One night, my stepmother pulled out a small envelope and sat beside me. Inside were more old photographs, my biological mother in college, in her graduation gown, holding newborn me in a hospital blanket. "She was trying to leave him," my stepmother said softly. "She'd saved money, filed paperwork. Planned to take you kids to her sister in California. Then one morning, she just collapsed." My stepmother didn't say it out loud. She didn't have to. We both knew my mother hadn't just died of a bad heart. She'd been silenced. As the trial crept closer, the prosecutor walked us through what to expect. She warned us how hard it would be to testify, especially when the defense tried to twist everything around. They'd say I was just a rebellious teen, angry about discipline. They'd argue the injuries were self-inflicted, that I'd faked the documents out of spite. On the first day of court, I wore a borrowed suit, one that Mrs. Harper's husband had loaned me. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Apparently, stories of forced child marriage in American suburbs made big headlines. When I saw my father again for the first time since his arrest, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight. His beard was scruffy. And when our eyes met, I expected rage. But what I saw instead was something like disappointment. Like I'd failed him. My uncle sat beside him, eyes locked on the floor. The prosecutor started by laying out the physical evidence. She presented the photos, medical records, and forged documents. She played the audio files, recordings of my father talking about marriage dowries. The judge stayed stoic, but I caught some jurors flinching. Then it was my turn to testify. I could barely walk to the stand. My legs were shaking so bad it felt like I'd collapse. The prosecutor helped steady me with calm, clear questions. I talked about our household, the rules, the punishments, the expectations. I told them about teaching my sisters to read, about finding my mom's degree in the attic, about the night Lila was slapped across the face just for spilling water. Then came cross-examination. Vic, the defense attorney, was polished, smooth, and ruthless. He tried poking holes in every word I said. He hinted that I'd manipulated my sisters, that I'd made it all up to get attention or rebel. He painted my father as a hardworking immigrant trying to protect his kids from Western corruption. "Isn't it true you resented the responsibility your father gave you?" he asked. "I resented watching my sisters be tortured," I replied. "You mean disciplined?" "I mean tortured." He showed pictures of our house, clean rooms, expensive furniture, as proof that my father had provided for us. "Then why wait so long to speak up?" he demanded. "Because I was 12, I said quietly. "And scared. And raised to believe that was just how the world worked." Maya's testimony was even harder to sit through. She barely whispered as she told them about the marriage prep, the freezing baths, the chores that never ended. When she rolled up her sleeves to show the scars from kneeling on rice, the entire room fell silent. Vic tried to suggest she'd harmed herself. But the medical examiner had already confirmed the injuries were consistent with prolonged abuse, not self-infliction. My stepmother's testimony turned out to be pivotal. She didn't just skim the surface, she laid it all out. The financial transactions, the emails with other families, the entire underground network my father had built around arranged child marriages. She admitted her own involvement, though she made it clear how trapped she had been. "Where was I supposed to go?" she said. "He had control over everything. The money. The paperwork. Even the people." She explained that even if she'd run, her own family would have just returned her to him. She was isolated by design. The prosecution presented further evidence of my father's obsession with control, especially over Lila. They brought forward emails where he referred to her foster placement as a kidnapping, and detailed his efforts to manipulate the courts to get her back. Then came the marriage contracts, some shockingly signed for girls as young as 9. Bank statements revealed payments exchanged for introductions between older men and underage girls. It was human trafficking disguised in tradition. Lila testified too, but through closed-circuit video. She was too young, and too afraid, to face our father in person. She talked about the beatings, the hunger when food was taken away as punishment, the constant fear of not knowing what would trigger another outburst. But when they asked about her life now, her face lit up. She talked about school, about her friends, and how her foster family didn't get mad when she had nightmares. She smiled. A real, unguarded smile. That alone spoke volumes. The defense clung desperately to cultural justifications. They tried to frame our story as a misunderstanding between traditions and Western law. They brought in character witnesses, people who called my father a devoted man of faith, a community leader. They claimed American authorities were tearing apart immigrant families over cultural ignorance. But none of it could stand up against the mountain of evidence. The jury took just 4 hours. Guilty. On every count. Child abuse. Attempted human trafficking. Forgery. Tax fraud. It felt surreal hearing it spoken aloud. My father sat still, his face pale and blank as the verdicts were read. The judge didn't set sentencing that day, but the prosecutor told us he'd be facing decades behind bars. My uncle was found guilty on few accounts, but he still wasn't going anywhere for a long time. Investigators had uncovered enough during the trial to arrest several other men from our community, men who had quietly participated in the same abusive systems. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed. Reporters called out questions, cameras clicked. But Mrs. Harper and the prosecutor stayed close, shielding us and guiding us to a waiting car. As I glanced back, I saw my father in shackles, looking so much smaller than the monster I had grown up fearing. The months that followed were a haze of court dates, custody evaluations, and big life changes. The judge tried to keep us siblings together, but in the end, practical concerns overruled that. Lila's foster family filed to adopt her. They were stable, loving, and already bonded with her. The court agreed. Maya and I were placed with the Benjamins, a couple experienced in working with traumatized teens. They lived 2 hours from Lila, close enough that we could still visit regularly. They had a daughter in college and had fostered other kids from complicated pasts. Moving into their home felt unreal. They gave us a tour, real bedrooms, doors that locked from the inside, gentle house rules meant to protect, not control. But still, I couldn't shake old habits. I kept asking for permission to eat, to use the bathroom, to go to bed. I didn't know how to exist without being told what to do. School wasn't much easier. News of the trial had spread. Some classmates gave me a wide berth, unsure of what to say. Others were too curious, asking questions that crossed every line. Thankfully, Mrs. Ed Harper stepped in again, making sure I got academic support and counseling to help me adjust. Maya struggled more openly. She rarely ate, spoke only when absolutely necessary, and would completely shut down if a male teacher got too close. The Benjamins found her a therapist who specialized in survivors of forced marriage and childhood trauma. Progress was painfully slow, but we celebrated the little wins, like the first time she chose her own outfit or told us what she wanted for dinner. We visited Lila once a month. And every time we saw her, she seemed more like a regular kid, giggling, joking, complaining about math homework. Her nightmares were fewer now, though sometimes she'd still jolt awake crying about spilled water. Her adoptive parents, Alexandra and her husband, always welcomed us. They never treated us like outsiders. Birthdays, holidays, even random weekend barbecues, they made sure we felt like part of the family, even if only for a few hours. 6 months after the trial ended, we got word that sentencing was scheduled. The judge opened the floor for victim impact statements. I'd written something, carefully thought out and revised, but when I stood up to speak, my voice wouldn't come. So I handed it in instead. In the letter, I told the court about the childhood he stole from me. About my mother, what she might have become, what she meant to us. About my sisters, how he tried to sell their futures like livestock. The judge sentenced him to 40 years. My uncle got 25. If they ever walked free again, they'd be old men. And for the first time in my life, the idea of a future, my future, felt like something real. Something possible.